The wind whispered low across the open prairie, threading through the grass like fingers brushing a lover's skin. Somewhere, far beyond the hills, thunder rolled, but it was not the kind that came from storms. This was the kind born of hooves and hard choices. Annabelle Drake had lived her whole life on the edge of the wild, in a place where fences meant survival and silence often said more than words. She was the daughter of a rancher, too proud to bend and too stubborn to ask for help. She knew how to mend a broken gate, shoot straight, and ride harder than most men dared. But nothing had prepared her for the night they came. The fire, the shadows, the sudden grip of a stranger's hand. And yet in the stillness that followed her capture, as fear coiled in her chest like smoke, one pair of eyes looked at her not with hate, but with recognition. He didn't speak, he didn't smile, but he didn't turn away either. His name was Sahali, and everything that came after would begin with a choice, his, then hers. Annabelle Drake had always risen before the sun. Her mornings were sacred, quiet minutes when the world hadn't yet remembered its cruelty. She moved through the corral with a rhythm born of habit, not joy. Her boots kicked up dust, her braids swung low down her back, and the horses greeted her with soft whinnies. They were the only creatures who asked nothing of her but presence. The Drake Ranch sat lonely against the San Pedro Hills, battered by sun and silence. Her father, Emmett Drake, called it a scrap of land with teeth. And it was true, everything fought to survive here. The cattle, the soil, the people. Her mother had died 6 winters ago, swallowed by fever and forgotten by God. Since then, Emmett had hardened. He spoke in grunts and orders, carving his grief into the land with every fence post and calloused command. Annabelle never cried in front of him. Not once. That morning had begun like any other. Sky painted pale blue, crows yawning from the cottonwoods. The familiar creak of the porch swing where Emmett liked to smoke. Nothing hinted at the storm that was coming. Not a cloud, not a whisper. By nightfall, it would all burn. The fire started with a scream. Annabelle bolted upright from bed, heart punching against her ribs. Outside, the barn was lit orange-red, flames licking the dark like tongues. She stumbled into her boots, grabbed the rifle, and burst through the cabin door, just in time to hear her father shouting. Then gunshots, then nothing. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. She sprinted across the yard, ducking beneath a hail of arrows that seemed to come from nowhere. Shadows on horseback moved fast through the smoke, masked in war paint and moonlight. One of them dismounted near the porch. She raised the rifle. Fired once. Missed. The man turned. She didn't see his face, not really, just eyes. Sharp, still. A look that didn't match the chaos around him. Then he was moving, fast. She tried to reload, but the world spun sideways. A blow to the back of her head sent her crumpling to the ground. Dirt filled her mouth. Someone yelled in a language she didn't understand. Her arms were yanked behind her, wrists bound tight with leather cord. Through the haze, she saw the body on the porch. Emmett Drake, face down, motionless. Her throat made no sound. She kicked, twisted, thrashed, but it was useless. She was dragged toward a horse, thrown across the saddle like a sack of grain. The last thing she saw before the world blurred into gallop and darkness was the barn collapsing in flames. Her whole life reduced to smoke and ash. When she awoke, it was still night. The stars above her spun. Her hands were numb, her lips split. Every part of her ached. She was tied to a post at the edge of some kind of camp. The firelight flickered low and figures moved in quiet, wordless rhythm. Not savages, as she'd been taught to believe. Not monsters, just people, cooking, talking low, settling in for rest. Annabelle didn't cry. She didn't beg. She sat still and watched. A group of warriors sat nearby, laughing in short bursts. One of them, younger, glared at her with thinly veiled contempt. Another glanced at her, then quickly away like she wasn't worth looking at. And then there was him, the one from before. He moved differently, slower, with purpose. When he walked, others stepped aside. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, but his eyes found hers in the dark. He didn't speak, didn't smirk or threaten. He just knelt and cut the bindings at her ankles, not her wrists, and handed her a blanket. A small gesture, but one that stole the breath from her lungs. She stared at him, wide-eyed, uncertain. He stood and walked away without a word. By morning, she was weak with hunger, but no longer tied. She could have run. The camp was open, no fences, no visible guards. But something told her not to. Something in the air. In the way the people watched her, alert but not hostile. An older woman brought her food, corn mash and boiled root. Annabelle took it in silence, hands trembling. The woman pointed to herself and said a word slowly. Hanaya. Annabelle hesitated. Annabelle, she said back. Hanaya nodded once, then left. That night the quiet returned, thick and full of weight. She sat beside the dying fire, still in her smoke-stained dress, clutching the blanket like a shield. Across the flames the warrior sat alone, carving something small from a piece of bone. She couldn't take her eyes off him. He looked up once, met her gaze, held it. She didn't look away. Not this time. By the third day, Annabelle had learned a few things. The older woman's name truly was Hania, and she held some quiet authority among the others. The camp followed rhythms older than clocks, and no one spoke to her unless necessary, but no one struck her either. That absence was loud. It made her wonder what kind of mercy this was, and what price might follow. The man who had spared her risks came and went like a shadow, never at night, never in crowds. He moved with that same stillness she'd seen in his eyes, like he belonged to the earth, not just walked on it. The others called him Nodin. She heard it whispered between mouthfuls of cornmeal, murmured in argument when tempers rose. Always with weight, always with something else underneath. Respect, maybe, or fear. That evening, as the firelight washed the camp in bronze, Annabelle sat alone, legs pulled to her chest, watching the flames sway in the breeze. A few feet away, Nodin carved a piece of wood, slow and precise. His knife moved like a brush, coaxing shape from nothing. She wanted to speak, ask what he was making, but her voice felt far away, as if buried beneath the ashes of her old life. He glanced up, sensing her watching. She didn't look away. "What are you carving?" she finally asked. Her voice cracked like dry wood. He didn't answer right away, just held up the figure. It was a bird, sharp-beaked, wings open, poised to fly. "A kestrel," he said at last. She blinked. His English was clipped but careful, not broken, deliberate. "Why a kestrel?" He ran a thumb across its wing. "Fast, watches from above, sees what others miss." Annabelle nodded slowly. "I used to see one, near the canyon." He tilted his head. "It was yours?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "But it always came back, made me feel less alone." For the first time, he almost smiled. Almost. That is what birds do. She wanted to ask him more, about his people, about what he believed, about why he'd spared her. But her tongue stumbled behind the wall of silence she'd built since the night of fire. So instead, she asked what felt safer. "Why did you help me?" He didn't respond, not with words. Instead, he handed her the carving, just reached out, palm open, and waited. She took it, fingers brushing his. It was smooth, lighter than she expected. A small thing, but it filled her chest with a pressure she didn't know how to name. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "You're not here as a prisoner? Not anymore." That word, anymore, landed like thunder between them. She clutched the bird tighter, unsure what it meant. Was it kindness? Pity? Duty? She had seen men offer favors before, and they always came with expectations. Ownership. A price. But Nodin didn't look at her like that. He didn't look through her. He looked at her. That night she couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because her thoughts wouldn't quiet. Her memories pulsed like bruises, especially the last thing her father had said to her, weeks before the fire. "Too wild, girl. You got your mother's fire, but none of her grace." She had taken it like all his words, without reaction. But now, sitting in a camp built by people her father had taught her to fear, gifted a wooden bird by a warrior who never raised his voice, she began to wonder. Maybe fire wasn't meant to be graceful. Maybe it was meant to survive. The next morning, Hania handed her a pot of steaming water and motioned toward the ridge. Annabelle understood enough now. She was to help gather roots. They walked in silence at first. The land stretched wide in every direction, a tapestry of golden grass and stone bones. Wind stirred the brush, carrying with it the scents of sage and smoke. A hawk circled above. They knelt beside a cluster of shrubs. Hania dug carefully, fingers parting the dirt like pages in a book. Annabelle mimicked her, digging slow, hands blackened. Her muscles ached, but it felt like a good ache, honest. "You learn fast," Hania said after a long while. Annabelle looked up, startled. I try. You listen more than most." Annabelle brushed hair from her face. "Talking never got me far." Hania gave a faint smile. "Wise. Too many speak without meaning." They worked in rhythm, passing roots into the basket. Then suddenly, Hania paused. "There is talk," she said. "Some do not like you here." "I figured." Annabelle's voice was dry. "They see what passes between you and Noden." Annabelle stiffened. "Nothing's passed." Hania raised an eyebrow. Not hands, not lips, but something. She opened her mouth to protest but couldn't, because Hania was right. Something had passed. Something unseen but undeniable. "I didn't ask for it," Annabelle said. "No," Hania said, standing with the basket. "But sometimes the wind chooses what to carry, whether we want it or not." They walked back in silence, and Annabelle found herself clutching the kestrel in her pocket the whole way. They came at dawn, not with war cries or painted faces, but with dust and rifles. Riders, 6, maybe 7, cresting the northern ridge where the sun hadn't yet burned off the night. Annabelle saw them first. She had stepped away from camp to gather water from the stream. Alone, the kestrel carving still in her pocket like a talisman. At first she thought it was a trick of light, but then came the glint of metal, the thudding of hooves, and something colder, the surety that they were not passing through. They were searching. She dropped the water tin and ran, faster than she had in weeks. Her feet pounded against the dry ground, lungs burning, hair whipping behind her. She didn't shout. There was no time. By the time she reached the camp, Noden had already stepped out from the central fire, bow in hand, his face unreadable. Others followed, men with spears, boys with knives, even 2 older women carrying long, curved sticks wrapped in hide. The camp moved like breath held too long. "They're coming from the North Ridge," Annabelle gasped. "They're close." No one doubted her. It wasn't a question of if anymore. It was how soon. Within minutes, the camp began to move. The youngest were ushered toward the canyon pass to the east, guided by 2 women and a man too old to hold a weapon, but not too old to lead. Annabelle stood frozen, useless, until Hania shoved a bundle of blankets into her arms. "Go," the old woman said. "Help them reach the hollow." "I can fight." "No," Hania said sharply. "You must be seen elsewhere." Annabelle blinked. "Why?" But it was Noden who answered, stepping close. "Because if they see you here when blood is spilled, they won't care who started it." He didn't say soldiers or ranchers, but she knew. White men, her people. The ones who'd never called her theirs, not really. Not when it mattered. "You'll come too?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer, but he reached out and touched her shoulder, firm and slow. "I walked the other path." And then he was gone, swallowed by the others as they moved into defensive positions. Hania gripped her arm, steering her toward the departing children. She moved on instinct now. No thought, just motion. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. Not until the shot rang out. The canyon hollow was narrow, hidden behind 2 boulders that looked like they'd been placed by the hands of giants. It took nearly an hour to get everyone there. And by the time Annabelle arrived with the last girl slung on her hip, her dress was torn and her feet blistered. But she hadn't stopped. Not once. The others huddled in silence. No fire, no talk, just breath and fear. It was the children who cried first, a low whimpering sound that turned to hiccups, then silence again. Annabelle moved between them, wrapping blankets, rubbing backs, whispering names she just learned. She counted heads over and over, but she didn't stop shaking. Then out of the shadowed trail, Hania appeared, mud-streaked, hair wild, but whole. "Where's Noden?" Annabelle asked. Hania's eyes didn't blink. Still standing. Then she added, but not for long. When Annabelle returned to the camp, it was dusk. Smoke hung like a veil. Not thick, but present. A reminder. A warning. Some tents were still standing. Others torn. 2 horses lay dead by the fence post. And in the center, near the fire pit, now reduced to embers, stood Noden. Blood soaked his shoulder, but he was upright. Alive. They had come, those riders. Demanded she be returned. Claimed she was property, stolen, misled, perhaps even bewitched. And when no one responded to their threats with fear, they fired. But Noden had stood tall. He didn't shoot first. But when the first bullet struck a child's toy near the fire, he loosed an arrow. And then the sky cracked open. Annabelle heard it all later. From Hania. From the wounded boy who'd fought with a stick and still claimed victory. From the man with one eye who swore Noden's arrow had split a rifle barrel clean in 2. She found Noden sitting beside the old fire ring, his face turned to the sky. You're hurt, she said, kneeling. He didn't look at her. I've been worse. I should have stayed. His eyes finally found hers. Number you did what I could not. What's that? Carry light. She touched his arm gently. They'll come again. I know. What happens next? Noden didn't answer for a long time. Then, you choose. Choose what? Whether you walk away or walk beside. Annabelle looked at the smoke curling toward the stars and made no reply. Not yet. The days that followed felt borrowed, like pages ripped from a story not meant for survival. The camp moved slowly, deliberately, deeper into the hills. The river was still their lifeline, but now they followed its more hidden paths, where cottonwoods leaned closer and the wind carried fewer secrets. Annabelle stayed. No one told her to. No one asked her to leave. But still the silence around her shifted. Eyes that once studied her with curiosity now watched with caution. Some of the children still reached for her hand, but the women, even gray hair, spoke less when she came near. Not out of cruelty, out of uncertainty. She was no longer just a stranger. She had become a weight, a potential spark, and fire was something they could not afford. Noden was healing, slowly. The wound in his shoulder had not festered, thanks to crushed yarrow and willowbark poultices, but it ached, and at night Annabelle could see it in the way he curled against the cold. She sat by him most evenings now, not as prisoner, not even as guest, just presence. He spoke more often, halting English mingled with words she didn't know, but the meanings were clear in tone, in gesture. He told her of the red cliffs west of here, where lightning once split stone, of his mother's laugh, of the first time he caught a fish with only his hands. She listened, and she told her own pieces in return, of the smell of her father's leather gloves, the sharp burn of pine in winter, of how loneliness could sometimes feel louder than thunder. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but they spoke of truth, and truth was rarer. One morning, as the mist still clung to the valley floor, gray hair came to Annabelle with a bundle of cloth. Inside, a skirt made of soft hide, simple but beautifully stitched, with beads the color of river stones. For walking, she said. Annabelle blinked. I don't know what to say. The old woman shrugged. Say nothing, but walk steady. She wore the skirt that day, not because she thought she'd earned it, but because refusing would have felt like rejecting something sacred. Noden noticed. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. You look here, he said. She didn't know what that meant, but she felt it. That afternoon, a scout returned. He had been sent east, toward the trading route where white wagons sometimes cut paths through the land like knives. He brought news. Riders had passed through a nearby canyon, looking, describing a girl with hair like wheat and a scar on her temple. Annabelle's hand rose to her face without thinking. They're still searching, Noden said that night. Annabelle nodded. They won't stop. No, he paused, but neither do rivers. She smiled faintly. That's something my mother would have said. You have her still? Annabelle shook her head. Lost her in winter. Fever. He was quiet for a while, then, you carry her in how you move. The words undid her a little. Not because they were romantic, but because they were true. She had never heard them spoken aloud before. Later that week, she followed Nodin to the bluff that overlooked the river's bend. It had become their place, unspoken but known, a space where silence did not feel hollow. He held a carved pendant in his hands, something small and dark, polished by fingers and time. He turned it over once, then held it out to her. "For remembering," he said. She took it, thumb brushing the edges. "Whose is it?" "My sister's," he said. The air grew thinner. "She was taken when I was 12. White soldiers. Never saw her again." Annabelle gripped the pendant tighter. "I'm sorry." He looked at her and something old passed between them. "I see her in dreams. But now, sometimes I see you there too." It was not a declaration. It was not even a question. It was a truth, quiet and unshakable. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Not as thanks, not as promise, but as choice. That night, the sky opened wide. Stars spilled down like whispers. And beneath them, beside a fire that burned low and honest, Annabelle leaned her head on Nodin's shoulder and closed her eyes. He didn't move. He just breathed. And for the first time since she had been taken, since the world had rewritten itself around her, she felt something like peace. Not safety, not yet love, but peace. The kind that wraps around you like a blanket still warm from someone else's hands. The scent came first. Wood smoke, faint but wrong. Not the dry, sweet scent of pine from their own fires, but something acrid. Burned leather, scorched grass. Annabelle stiffened where she crouched, pulling roots from the loose soil beside gray hair. The old woman paused too, nostrils flaring like a deer scenting danger. Then came the birds, rising all at once from the trees along the river, scattering in frantic spirals toward the sun. Something was coming. By nightfall, the scouts returned with confirmation. Riders, half a dozen, white men, armed, tracking. They hadn't seen the camp yet, but they were close enough to smell the ashes from a cold fire. Annabelle stood just beyond the circle of warriors as the council gathered around the flame. Voices rose in low, sharp murmurs, many of them in words she couldn't understand. But some things didn't need translation. Anger, fear, doubt. Lone Crow, tall, gaunt, with a sharp scar over one eye, stepped forward. His eyes burned as they locked on Annabelle. "This is because of her," a few others nodded. "She led them here." "I didn't," she said, voice steady. Lone Crow snarled. "You didn't have to." Nodin stood before her, not drawing a weapon, not shouting, just standing. "She is not the one carrying the fire. She carries the match," the man hissed. Gray hair stepped in then, her voice low but firm. She spoke in Apache, short and final. It ended the discussion for now, but not the doubt. Annabelle could feel it like a splinter under skin. They were balancing on the edge of something, and the wind was rising. Later, by the edge of the sleeping camp, Annabelle sat beside Nodin beneath a stunted cedar tree. He was sharpening his blade, slow and rhythmic. "I should leave," she said, her voice thin. "If I go now, maybe they'll follow me instead." Nodin didn't look at her. "You think you are the cause, but you are only the mirror." "What does that mean?" He stopped sharpening. "They see what they're afraid of in you. Change, blame, mercy. Depends on the man." She looked down at her hands dusted with earth. "I don't want anyone to die for me." He finally looked at her. "You can't stop a storm by blaming the sky." The riders came at dawn, 6 of them, faces shaded by wide-brimmed hats, rifles ready. One wore a vest Annabelle recognized instantly, Elias Mayfield. She stood at the edge of camp when they arrived, alone. She walked forward slow and steady, both hands open. Elias reined in his horse hard, his jaw tight. "You alive?" "I am." "Are they holding you here? Did they hurt you?" Number I stayed, his face twisted. "That's not possible. You were taken." "I was seen," she corrected. "They could have killed me. They didn't." Behind her, movement stirred in the brush. Shadows, warriors, watching, but not striking. "We're here to bring you home, Annabelle." She took a breath. "I don't think that's where I belong anymore." He spat. "You're not thinking straight. You've gone soft. They've brainwashed you. No, she said. I've just seen more than you ever let me. She stepped aside, and Nodin came forward, unarmed. He stood tall and still, hands visible, body relaxed, not weak, not submissive, just open. Elias' hand hovered over his pistol. Move, he barked. Nodin didn't. I said move! Nodin spoke only one word. No! The air cracked, a shot fired, but it wasn't Elias who pulled the trigger. One of the other riders, young, frightened, had panicked. The bullet kicked up dirt near Nodin's feet, and with that, everything fractured. It didn't become a battle. It became a retreat. The riders were outnumbered, outmatched. When the warriors emerged from the trees, arrows knocked but not loosed, the riders turned and fled, all except Elias. He stayed glaring. You'll regret this, he said to Annabelle. You'll come crawling back one day. She didn't answer, just turned her back. That night the camp was quiet, not celebratory, just quiet. Like they all knew this wasn't an ending, just a pause before the next breath. Annabelle sat with Nodin near the fire. The stars above blinked like slow thoughts. You could have been killed, she whispered. So could you. She looked over at him. What happens now? He didn't answer right away. Then, now we build, or we run, or we wait. She took his hand, not because she knew what would happen, but because she needed to feel something real. And in his palm, calloused and warm, was a truth no words could twist. They had both chosen each other, and in that choice, something sacred had begun. The ridge burned amber with first light. Annabelle stood alone at its edge, wind lifting her hair as she stared northward, toward the world she had come from, a world that had never truly seen her. Behind her, the camp slowly stirred, the people rising with the rhythm of smoke and sun. She didn't belong there, not yet, maybe not ever, but she didn't belong to the world beyond those ridge lines either. She was somewhere between, no longer a stranger, not quite one of them. A life waiting to be written, breath by breath. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Nodin. He stood beside her without speaking. He never pushed for words. He only waited for the ones that mattered. She turned to him. They'll come back, won't they? He nodded, eyes scanning the far distance. Not today, but yes. Annabelle's jaw tightened. And if they come with more than rifles next time, then we meet them with more than fear. They were quiet for a while, listening to the land breathe. Then she asked the question that had haunted her every night since the skirmish. Do I have to leave to protect you? He didn't answer right away, but when he did, his voice was sure. Number, you don't run from a fire when you are the flame. Over the following days, the camp changed. Children who had once stared at her wide-eyed now pulled on her skirts, laughed at her clumsy weaving, called her White Crow with teasing affection. Gray hair taught her to grind corn and bundle sage without snapping the stems. She was patient with Annabelle's hands, but never her excuses. Lone Crow kept his distance. His silence was colder now, but not cruel, just resigned. His grief was a wall, and some walls were built to keep people in, not out. Nodin remained the same, present, steady, but never pressing. He brought her water in the heat and sat with her under the trees when the air grew thick with memory. He spoke little, but his gaze was a place she could rest. They didn't speak of love. They didn't need to. It was there in every gesture. When he carved her a bone comb and tucked it into her hand without a word. When she fixed his tunic with uneven stitches and he wore it anyway. When their hands brushed and neither pulled away. One night, as the drums echoed low across the dark, Nodin approached with 2 horses saddled and ready. Annabelle blinked. We're going somewhere? He nodded. You need to see something. They rode east, through the trees, up into the hills where the stars bent low and the wind spoke in hushes. After an hour, they reached a narrow clearing. A lone cottonwood tree stood at its center, its roots curled around a patch of blackened stone. Here, Nodin said, dismounting. Annabelle followed. What is this place? He knelt and ran a hand across the stone. My sister. This is where I last saw her. Annabelle felt her chest tighten. I thought if I stayed angry, she'd still be close, he said. But anger is a fire that burns from the inside. She knelt beside him, touched the stone gently. I'm sorry. You don't have to be. They sat in silence for a long time. Then softly, Nodin said, I want you to have a name. She blinked. I already have one. A name here, he said. A name they can call you. One not carried on papers or by people who never knew you. She looked at him, heart rising like dawn behind her ribs. What name? He smiled, slow and quiet. Kiani. It means one who walks between. She swallowed. Because I don't belong anywhere? No, he said, reaching for her hand. Because you belong in more than one place. She nodded. Kiani. A name shaped by both fire and peace. A name she would carry. Years passed. Seasons turned like pages. The camp shifted but endured. Some of the tribe moved north, others west. But a small band stayed near the river. They built homes from stone and timber, planted corn in long rows, raised their children under sky wide enough to hold all their names. Nodin and Kiani never married in the way her old world would have understood. No papers, no preacher, no vow shouted over flowers. But they built a life. They slept under the same roof, shared the same breath, raised a daughter who had Nodin's quiet strength and Annabelle's storm-born spirit. And when strangers rode in from the south one spring, a group of ranchers, tight-faced and rifle-ready, Kiani stood at the front of the village. Not with weapons, but with open hands. She told them her story, told them the truth. Most didn't believe her, but one listened, and sometimes one is enough. In time, stories spread of a white woman who lived with the Apache and didn't just survive, but chose to stay. Of a man who once carried vengeance in his chest but now taught children how to carve horses from wood. Of a place where fear didn't win. They weren't legends. They were just people, and that was what made it sacred. One night, long after the fires dimmed and the drums faded, Kiani sat by the river alone. She held a carved horse in her palm, old now, worn smooth from years of touch. She placed it in the water, watched it float, watched it go, then whispered, I see you, to the wind. The water answered in ripples, and somewhere in the stillness between breath and nightfall, the fire they'd lit together kept burning, quiet, steady, and unending. She didn't ride off into a perfect sunset. She stayed between two worlds, between two names, and made something new. Not a legend, not a myth, just a woman who chose courage when no one asked her to. If this story touched something deep in you, if you felt the fire between them or saw a part of yourself in her silence, tell me in the comments, would you have stayed or ridden away? Stories like this don't need loud heroes. They need people who see each other and remember. So what part of this story will you remember?